Safe to Serve family, welcome to this midday power surge. And today we have a startling lesson to present. And today I'm not alone. I do have a special guest, not a stranger to our platform, and that is Marie Diaz from Eyes on the Times. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you so much for having me, Pastor. It's great to be back.
As you realize, I just omitted the introduction to get right into the crux of the matter today. We have a lot to cover, friends, and several things are trending. And as you can see in the thumbnail, we'll be addressing the new bill to amend the U.S. Constitution that will unite church and state and force you to worship. This is a new occurrence that's taking place right now. And as a watchman on the walls of Zion, I must bring to you these breaking news events. At this point, we want to address this new bill that is essentially uniting church and state to amend the U.S. Constitution and then force people to worship, bringing religion into public schools, bringing religion on the state level and then federal level, and force you to worship on Sunday. Marie, take it away.
Pastor, as we're beginning this, I was really thinking, I don't think that I can overstate the significance of what we're going to essentially cover. And to put it succinctly, as you just said, we're talking about legislators who are seeking to amend the state constitution first. And of course, it could eventually go up to the U.S. Constitution, right? To unite, as you stated, church and state. And I want to say, the quote is, for the institution of public worship. As a wife and a mother of 4 children, I am acutely aware of the difference between, preliminary contractions and the real deal, not Braxton Hicks, but actual birth pangs. And one of the differences, the tall tale marks that you're in true labor is the intensity and also the frequency of the contractions. And I don't know, Pastor, it just seems like we came into this new year and it just seems like back to back. There's all sorts of agitations, things that are happening. Legislators are introducing one bill after another that's somehow related in some regard to religion, and they're trying to get these things passed into law, whether it has to do with the school. You have the Heritage Foundation coming out with their booklet discussing a uniform day of rest. All over the place. And I'm telling you, the contractions are getting stronger. And to me, it's an indication that Jesus is coming this, more sooner than most of us believe.
Go ahead.
Yes. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to begin by laying a foundation so that your audience can see clearly, that there is this concerted, even a collaborative effort to establish these religious laws. But we're going to see how in the White House and down to the individual state legislatures that, like I said, there's this movement to unite church and state. And of course, this is on the local level. And this is key, right? Because if you truly understand how the Sunday movement is going to begin, it's going to begin as a grassroots movement, right? And so it would make sense that they would begin on the state and the local levels where the legislators are. And also I like to think of the fact that when you look at how they were able to introduce the same-sex union laws, it began right on the lower levels. And of course, it went to the individual states, it went through the district courts, and eventually to the Supreme Court, where they finally were able to enshrine it into the U.S. Constitution. And so as we're going forward, I just want you to keep those things in mind so that you can see how this could become a gradual movement.
Yes.
So were you going to jump in here?
No.
Okay, so we're going to begin here by taking a look at a video clip. And this is, again, like I said, because we're going to show from the White House all the way down to the individual states how there's this movement to unite church and state. So we're going to look at this first clip from J.D. Vance in which he is going to discuss this very move. Let's take a listen to that clip.
Here it is.
If you go back to the First Amendment, it doesn't say separation of church and state. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. But if you go back to the founding time, there were actually a number of states that had formally recognized churches. So there was the Anglican Church of Virginia. That was the official state church of Virginia. Maryland at the time was the only majority Catholic colony, or at least had a significant Catholic representation of the original 13 colonies. There's a lot there. And yes, I do think that what happened is the Supreme Court interpreted Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion to effectively throw the church out of every public space at the federal, state, and local level. I think it was a terrible mistake, and we're still paying for the consequences of it today. But and I think this is your point, if you were to undo that, if you were to get back to a system actually meant by the founders where Congress is not setting up an established religion, but people in their local communities can kind of do whatever it is that they want to do, I think that would be a better system than what we have today.
Marie.
Yes. So just to reiterate some of the points that he mentioned there, right? He referred to the Anglican Church and how that was an official state church, or you can say an established state religion. He also noted that he believed that that was a mistake on behalf of Congress, separating religion from the government on all levels, because the Establishment Clause, what he's alluding to, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So again, the emphasis there is on Congress. In fact, he suggested that, we should go as far as to undo that, meaning we should be able to establish individual state churches, right? Because the prohibition is on Congress at the federal level and not on the state level.
And I want everyone to zoom in on that statement. So the agenda is to rewrite the U.S. Constitution. The agenda is to amend the U.S. Constitution to fit their ideal, to fit their agenda. That is the essence of this vice president and J.D. Vance, Kevin Roberts, as we would see later, and even Jonathan Berry. Marie, people do not miss that. Go ahead.
Yes. And again, it's so important for you to see that this isn't an isolated incident.
Correct.
You're hearing it at the federal level, in the White House. And now we're going to see that there are other individuals who are essentially saying the same thing. Right. And so we're going to show how, in order for them to establish this, union of church and state on the state levels, other individuals are saying it as well. So we're going to take a listen to another clip, and this is coming from Jonathan Berry. And I know that we played several of his clips ad nauseum, but I thought it was really important for us to replay these clips. And of course, I condensed them so that you can see that he is pushing for religion at the state and not the federal level. So let's take a listen to the next clip here.
And for those who don't know who he is and his clout and influence, who is he, Marie?
He is the Solicitor of Labor under this current administration.
Here it is. Come on, Barry.
It's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. I don't think Congress has the authority to mandate like a national closing on the Sabbath. That was always a state decision to do that.
I don't see a big. It's harder to see a big federal role for this. I think this is more a question of state and local law. Is reinvigorating where possible Sabbath rest laws.
But I want to lay out some guideposts, some categories of state actions that are likelier to be prudent applications of state power to balance corporate power. And another one in the collective action space that I'm fond of, call it the Chick-fil-A rule, would be to revive Sunday closing laws.
Well, friends, you have heard from Mr. Mark of the Beast. Go ahead.
Right. And so you can clearly see how there is this concerted effort to direct their energies towards the states. And again, because if they use that, right, they can justify it by saying that the prohibition, again, is on Congress. And as you rightly stated, Pastor, Jonathan Berry, he is the head lawyer, the Solicitor of Labor, right? And of course, we know that the labor movement is going to play a fundamental role in the last days. And so if you have somebody who's saying, listen, it's okay for you you to be able to rest on Sunday, and we will back you up by law. Imagine the impetus that it's going to give to those workers. So
and
now we're going to...
less people are sleeping on us. Just remember, we are getting to this new bill. We're laying the foundation now. Marie, continue.
Right. And it's important for you to see these layers. So once we introduce this article, you'll see how they're connected.
Yes.
Now, even Heritage Foundation is promoting this idea. And of course, I know that recently with the new document that they brought out regarding this uniform day of rest, everyone has diverted their attention to that particular article. But they just recently came to this new article, which you can see on the screen here. And in this article, they decided to revise a clause-by-clause analysis of the Constitution. Of course, they also added their commentary and things so that you can understand their perspective on the Constitution, right? And of course, they used lawyers and judges and, various other individuals so that it gives weight to what they're saying. So again, we're going to take a look at their commentary based on the Establishment Clause. And again, what that says, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And it says here, scholars generally agree that the framers viewed the 18th century Church of England as a foil for their vision of the relationship between, get it here, church and the federal government. And that's key because already the emphasis is on the federal government. It goes on, it says the Establishment Clause reflects the historical sentiment. The framers, however, did not believe that a public role for religion was evil in and of itself. And so, like I said, you're already seeing how they want you to focus on the fact that this only applies to the federal government. It continues. It says, before the American Revolution, the Church of England had some day-to-day discretion over religious activities. And it goes on. For instance, attendance at Anglican services was mandatory, with non-attendance resulting in fines. And the payment of some tithes were mandatory as a special form of tax. In the colonies, the Church of England was officially established by law. So obviously, there's some implications for a Sunday law, based on what we just read at the state level. But in addition to this, I want your audience to pay special attention to the fact that they mention tithes as a special form of tax. That's going to make sense as we revert back to this later on in this presentation. But even here, the Heritage Foundation, like I said, is making this case that the separation of church and state is exclusively at the federal government or the federal level as opposed to the state. And so by their own admission, the colonies established essentially a state-sponsored religion.
Continue, Marie.
Right. So here is where they're going to tell you with no ambiguity that the Establishment Clause is strictly for the federal government. Let's take a look at that. It says, the state ratification debates shed little direct light on the original meaning of the Establishment Clause. However, there was a general desire to avoid an official federal church and prevent the federal government from breaking up state-established religions. It goes on to say, you can read all of that. It says the absence of popular pushback in the states to ratification of the First Amendment is consistent with the understanding that the American public view the text as prohibiting any federal involvement in an establishment of religion, right? And so again, like I said, they're telling you that prominent figures, we're telling you, prominent figures on all levels, J.D. Vance, Jonathan Berry, the Heritage Foundation, which is incredibly influential, not just here in the United States, but in the world, they're telling you that the prohibition is only on the federal level. So if it's only on the federal level, that means that we can go ahead and establish a state-sponsored religion or church in every state, all 50 states.
And the majority would carry.
Yes.
And the majority promotes Sunday worship by law. Continue, Marie.
So, as previously mentioned, tithes, which obviously is directly related to the church, was mandatory as a special form of tax, right? And we're going to also see that based on this clause by clause analysis, that another hallmark for state-sponsored religion is state-funded religious instruction in schools. The article continues. It says, there also was significant government funding of religious institution. It goes on to say that the purpose of financing worship amounted to coerced religious observance. Now, the Heritage Foundation sidesteps this argument by saying this next phrase here. It says, such concerns were not raised in opposition to Maryland's financial support of religious schools throughout the early 1800s.
Correct.
So in other words, although there was pushback, or as they said, coerced religious observance in 1785 in the legislature, the state still endorsed this policy, which by their own admission is religious coercion. I mean, I don't think you can make it any clearer.
Continue.
So now, before we move on, I just want to quickly recapitulate, right? So that everyone is on the same page as we prepare to go into the crux of what we're here to present. So far we've shown that the emphasis or the focus is on the federal and not the state level, right? And furthermore, the Heritage Foundation is also telling us that states financing religious institutions and even worship is considered coerced religious observance, right? But yet they still endorse these policies. I just want to reiterate that, right? They still endorse, the states still endorse coerced religious observance. You know, to me, that's just like, but again, when you understand Bible prophecy, you know that we are going to be coerced to worship and to finance and to do things that we're not supposed to do, according to, what the Bible says.
Marie, as you segue and to confirm everything you just said, a big overview point is this. This is a manual coming from the Heritage Foundation, correct?
Yes.
It's called the Heritage Guide to the U.S. Constitution. And if you notice, it says here, a comprehensive guide to the Constitution's original meaning from more than 150 jurists, scholars, and practitioners. Big point I'm making here. So this is to confirm, Marie, the Heritage Foundation is the ones behind the curtain. They're the ones with this proverbial having the puppets on the string. They wrote this guide for Congress and SCOTUS. But they also wrote another guide, manual for the White House, the executive branch of government. It was called the Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025. Do we all realize, STS family, that this organization is controlling, it's influencing all three branches of government simultaneously? If that doesn't awaken you, I'm not sure what else. Maybe this will. Chapter 13 of Revelation, verse 11 says, America will speak as a dragon. Verse 12, force you to worship or be killed. Verse 15, how does a nation speak? Through her legislative and judicial branches of government. And here is heritage controlling all three branches. Is America about to speak now and force you to worship, beginning on the state level? Marie, you continue.
And Pastor, not just that, right? It's not just heritage, it's who's behind heritage, right? Because Kevin Roberts, the head of Heritage, is a cowboy Catholic, as, he calls himself, right? And so it's really the Catholic system that is behind this movement, which is something that we all should think about. So now we're going to continue here. So,
Marie,
yes, sir. Yes.
Elder Ryan, Jared just said, let's not overlook this fact that the preface was written by Justice Samuel Alito from SCOTUS. So that's important right there. So here's a connection between Kevin Roberts, Heritage, and a sitting U.S. justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Let that sink in. I mean, that needs its own space. Marie, continue, lest they forget what you are about to hit right now. Continue.
Okay. Right. So now we're going to jump into this breaking news. We're going to begin first by taking a look at a Facebook post from another legislator who is discussing this current bill that is before the New Hampshire legislature. So let's take a look at this post here. It says, a group of Republican state representatives have filed legislation to amend the state constitution, which in effect would transform the New Hampshire into an evangelical theocracy.
Christian theocracy.
This is unbelievable, right? So you have another lawmaker who's telling you they're looking at this bill and they're saying what they've introduced will essentially establish a theocracy there in New Hampshire. So some may say that this is a Democratic, lawmaker and that he may be attempting to put his own spin on this bill. I won't call it a religious bill, on this bill. And so what I want to do now is I want us to take a listen to one of the sponsors of this bill. I want you to hear what they have to say and why they're bringing this bill to the forefront. So let's take a listen to this first clip here.
Clip one.
And I bring this CACR before you on behalf of some of my constituents. There's some misconceptions about it. It's not about religion or religious zealotry. I'm not a religious zealot. I'm far from it. It's about taxing authority. And this CACR looks to correct some flaws in the language, which have caused some commotion regarding the authority of the state to tax.
Whoa.
So in short, he's essentially saying that this has nothing to do with religion. It's just about taxes and the taxing authority. And the purpose of this bill is simply so that we can make some corrections, right? And so I guess you kind of have to wonder, why would this other lawmaker suggest that this bill somehow is related to religion? Just stick a pin there and we'll get back to that momentarily. But before I play the next clip, which is another sponsor of this bill, I just want to give a little bit of a historical context so that you can kind of understand what they're getting at, right? So eventually what ended up happening is that the Article 6, right, of the state constitution was written one way. Later on, there was this Toleration Act that was implemented, I believe, in 1819, in which it separated church and state and also was linked to taxation, right? And essentially, the issue or the reason why they're bringing this bill to the forefront is because they said that somehow this Toleration Act was put into law illegally, or it wasn't done properly. And so they want to undo the Toleration Act to address this issue. And so that's generally the context of why this bill is coming to the forefront. So I want you to listen to this next clip so that you'll be able to hear that he's essentially saying the same thing. Take a listen to the next clip.
Okay, here it is.
Most of the schools in 1784 are religious schools. There's very few secular schools at all. And they would do is they go into a town and through Article 6, they would use the warrant article system to raise taxation at their own expense, and they would fund sectarian schools. What happens in 1819, however, though, is a lot of the different sects and denominations are not really comfortable with that. So there's a dispute. And in 1819, we put forward a legislative act known as the Toleration Act. And this is the first time that we separate church from state. So in 1819 is the first time where we get the beginning of what's called free schools or common schools. And common schools are what we would really view as common public education as we see it today.
Mm-hmm. Public schools. Yes, Marie.
Right. So if you listen carefully, he mentioned the fact that the Toleration Act, when it went into effect, it officially separated church from state. Mm-hmm. And so when you put that succinctly, right, if they were to revert back to the original language in the state's constitution in order to address the issues of taxation, it would unite naturally church and state together, right? And so in the simplest terms, that's what they're advocating, but they're hiding behind this taxation. Whether or not this is genuine, of course, I question the timing of all of this, but essentially that's what they're advocating for.
And this took place on February 4. Continue, Marie.
Right. And so now we're going to take a look at the actual text of the bill. And I just want to remind the audience that this isn't just a bill. As you're about to see, this is a proposed amendment to the state's constitution. There's a distinct difference there. It's one thing to have a bill, it's another thing to change the constitution itself. But let's take a listen to the language there, and you tell me that there isn't some sort of deception that's going on here. It says, "Be it resolved by the House of Representatives, the Senate concurring, that the Constitution of New Hampshire be amended as follows, that the first part of the Constitution be repealed and enacted to read as follows." So just briefly, in other words, they want to redact or replace what is currently written with the following. And this is what is so significant. It says, "As morality and piety, rightly grounded on evangelical principles," and it goes on, says, "is most likely to be propagated through a society by the institution of the public worship of the deity and of public instruction in morality and religion."
Marie, somebody didn't get that. They are in essence telling you they want a amendment to the state's constitution, as they put it, so people can publicly worship the deity. They can receive instructions on morality and religion. That is a big deal today. It shows us in this new bill, this amendment of the Constitution, the Sunday movement is nearer than we believe. Marie.
Yes. And I'm just going to reiterate that because I don't want us to miss how significant this is, right? It says this is currently being debated in the New Hampshire legislature, right? The institution of public worship of the deity and of public instruction, don't miss that, in morality in religion. So essentially what that does, it embeds religious principles into the state constitution and links them to good government, right? It claims that morality and social order depends on evangelical principles and public worship of the deity. And of course, this gives, or this lends, the government an official role in promoting religion. And as we continue, you'll see that this same bill will also authorize, public funding and support for religious teachers. And so what this does, it normalizes state involvement, not just in religious instruction, but also in worship, directly related to worship, right? And of course, this also not only lays the foundation, but it helps for the expansion of where this bill could potentially go. And, dare I say, it's going to eventually lead to coerced worship.
Before you get into that segment with the funding, this states that it is an amendment to the Constitution, and they call it the institution of the public worship of the deity and of public instruction in morality and religion. Everybody, hear me carefully. That means your civil leaders become preachers. Let that sink in. The state house officially becomes the church house. How can a civil law instruct publicly people on morality and religion? One of two things. Either currently your politicians are ministers and they are going to be the ones to instruct you on morality and religion, or they are going to bring in preachers from various denominations, and those preachers will now have the authority from the state to now teach morality and religion. What are they going to teach you? What is the majority? Is it not Sunday preachers, Sunday worship by law? And A.T. Jones encountered this in 1888. Quickly, Marie. And that's where he said, if this were to occur, then the church will become the state, and the state become the church. And then he said, if the state is going to teach religion and morality, once somebody accepts Christ, he must get baptized. He must receive baptism. That means the state must now baptize. And when A.T. Jones said that in Congress, that's when they began to backpedal. Marie, take it away. We are seeing history being repeated, and that prophecy is being fulfilled. Go ahead, Marie. I'm going to find a quote. Go ahead.
You know, and I love how you said that history is being repeated, because we're going to show a comparison later on, which I think is going to completely solidify this. But I also want the audience to remember that based on that clause by clause analysis of the Constitution that we presented earlier, the Heritage Foundation said that the states could essentially coerce religion through mandating church attendance, as did the Church of England, or through financing worship, which is coerced religious observance. So how much clearer can it be, right? Now, we're going to continue here with this article here. It says, therefore, to promote those important purposes, the people of the state have a right to empower and do hereby fully empower the legislature to authorize from time to time, and it goes on, for the support and maintenance of public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality. It says, in every denomination of Christians demeaning themselves quietly and as good subjects of the state shall be equally under the protection of the law. Now, this portion of the bill essentially gives preferential treatment to the Protestant Christianity, right? And would treat Christians as a legally protected class. Hence the phrase that says it shall be equally under the protection of the law. You know, and this also centers around public life, you know, and of course, Christian belief. But lastly, it would marginalize non-Christians or whomsoever they deem to be non-Christians simply by omission if a certain class of Christians is elevated and protected by law. I want you to take a listen to another clip in which somebody is going to express the very same sentiments. Take a listen to this next clip.
I guarantee if this constitutional amendment appears on the ballot, people would not understand what you're getting at. I think there's also a disservice done to this committee and to the public in the way this amendment is presented in the legislative handouts. I don't know whether to blame the sponsor or OLS, but usually when you get a bill, you have new text in bold, you have deleted text in brackets or italics or something, and you can compare them. You do not have that here. You have instead language that looks like the only people who should be hired as teachers are Christians, and we need public worship. This is not 1784. We don't have the same community uniformity that we did at the time that was very accurately described by previous speakers. I don't think we want to go back to the 1784 writing of this.
Pastor, that is so clear.
Yes.
She said public worship and Christian teachers, right? She also mentioned the fact that the voters themselves would have no idea what they would be voting for. So simply by the way that this proposal has been written, it almost makes you wonder if this was by design, if they're intentionally doing this to be deceptive, you know, because she noted how normally when there's some sort of amendment or change, they show you what is being changed, right?
Correct.
So again, it just makes you wonder here.
Just as Sister White says, that when we see a movement to bring religion into public schools, the Sunday law is next. It's right there. When you see a movement to bring religion into public schools, expect Sunday legislation. Review and Herald, April 20, 1905. Marie, take it away.
Now, this same speaker is going to make another valid point, which I totally agree with, right? She's saying regarding this taxation portion of the bill, if that's truly the reason or why you're bringing this bill to the forefront, why not just introduce a bill that addresses the issue with taxation? So take a listen to what she has to say in that.
If the issue is power to tax for schools, then write a bill that does that. Defeat this because nobody will understand what it's doing other than seeming to propose some purely Christian values on a much more diverse population than we had in 1784.
I'm trying to understand why we would choose this particular one to go back to the original language, where it very much appears that we are delegating the coercive taxation authority of the state to raise taxes on behalf of different denominations of the church to pay for teachers, which very much, in my mind, models the Church of England system, which the Puritans came here to get away from.
Correct. No, you're right. And that's what, and the word evangelical, by the way, in Article 6 must be read in light of the fact that it was a term of law, not a term of religion. The word evangelical is defined as biblical principles.
Marie.
That was so convoluted. Like, what is he talking about? It makes no sense, right? But if you were listening to the questioner, he says, you know, when he asked the sponsor, he said, why did you pick this particular article to go back to, which resembles the model of the Church of England system, right? And the sponsor responded by saying, correct. So yes, this system directly mirrors what the Church of England did, and of course, what the colonies did by establishing a church and state union here in the States. But then he attempts to neutralize that argument or that statement by implying that evangelical somehow doesn't mean Christian, but it means biblical principle. My question is, how is that any different, right? Evangelicals supposedly derive their principles from the Bible, therefore making it biblical principles. So it just doesn't make sense. And it leads me to believe that there could potentially be some other ulterior motives behind the purpose of introducing this amendment.
Yes, continue.
Yes. So in this final clip here, we're going to see how another lawmaker who is opposed to this amendment, he is going to tell you again emphatically that if this amendment were to be passed into law, that they would officially unite church and state. So take a listen to this last clip.
Okay, here it is.
I'm a believer in the separation of church and state and the separation of church from state. And if we restore this language from 1784, and I was glad Mr. Murray confirmed that that's what this is doing. They're putting Article 6 back the way it was in before 1968.
How much clearer can it be, Marie?
I don't think it can be any clearer. You know, and this reminds me of what Sister White says in Volume 5 of the Testimonies, page 451. She says, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government and shall make provisions for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, right? You know, I've always attributed this quote to simply mean the U.S. Constitution, but on a secondary application, the same could be said for the individual states. And this is like, you know, the unrolling of the scroll, right? As we're nearing the end and the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, we're seeing how all of these things can be, you know, put into action, and we can see how it's happening gradually here.
Because we were the ones who limited the statement to mean only federal. So when it's happening on the state level, we don't pay it any attention. See? And that's why the next paragraph says now, watch carefully. It says, as the approach of the Roman armies, as the approach, Marie, as the approach was a sign to Christ's disciples of the impending destruction of Jerusalem, so may this apostasy be a sign to us that the limit of God's forbearance is reached. The measure of our nation's iniquity is full, and the angel of mercy is about to take her flight, never to return. Then God's people will be plunged into those scenes of affliction and distress, which prophets have described as the time of Jacob's trouble. Friends, before it can go federal, it must begin on the state level. So as we see it approaching, don't wait until Titus comes, because when he comes and surrounds Jerusalem, it's too late. You saw cestius. So, Marie, we can say then, the amendment of the state's constitution to bring religion into the public square. The amendment of the state's constitution, Marie, to unite church and state. And to what? The institution of the public worship of a deity, as in New Hampshire. That is cestius. This is cestius. When it happens on the federal level, that is Titus. And that's what people don't see. Marie.
Lord have mercy. You know, Pastor, when I first stumbled over this article, you know, it physically made me feel sick to my stomach, you know, because we're living, prophecy is happening right before our eyes. And I'm hoping and praying that we haven't become desensitized by hearing these things over and over. I mean, it's right at our doorsteps. But I want to continue here in this last segment, as if what we presented weren't enough. And I think this is, in addition to what I just said, I think this is what made me feel the way that I felt. You know, in 1888, an amendment to the U.S. Constitution was proposed by Senator Henry Blair. Now, I'm going to pause here because I wonder if your audience knows from which state he hails from.
Florida?
Is that coincidental, Pastor?
No, it's not.
Is it coincidental that another bill that would revert back to the original Article 6 that talks about the institution of the public worship of the deity comes from New Hampshire? Let's take a look at this quote from A.T. Jones here. It says, December the 9th, 1888, Senator Blair of New Hampshire reintroduced his bill for a national Sunday law, a bill to secure to the people the enjoyment of the first day of the week, commonly known as the Lord's Day, as a day of rest, and to promote its observance as a day of religious worship. And what are we discussing? A religious amendment to the state constitution calling for the institution of public worship of the deity. I can't.
I mean, this segment alone should awaken every SDA. And for those non-SDA who are inclined to end-time prophecy, awaken them also. And to add to that, Marie, this statement says, the Blair Bill Amendment Resolution. Listen what it says. The first sentence doesn't say federal government. It says each state. Each state in this union shall establish and maintain a system of free public schools adequate for the education of all the children living therein. And then it goes on. Then it says, in virtue and morality and in knowledge of the fundamental and non-sectarian principles of Christianity. The very same thing is happening now in New Hampshire. We want the state to now enact the public worship of a deity and also to instruct the residents on morality and religion. As it was, so it is. And that's why it's dangerous not to know history. What is that colloquial saying? Those who don't study history are what, Marie?
Are destined to repeat it.
Take it away.
We have one more quotation from A.T. Jones here. It says, thus, Senator Blair introduced in the 51st Congress a religious amendment to the Constitution, which proposed to have taught in the common schools of every state the fundamental and non-sectarian principles of Christianity. And it goes on to say that this amendment would discriminate against the Jews and other denominations which are not Christian, leaving them no alternative but that of joining the ranks of its opposition. Doesn't that sound like a protected class of individuals? So on all three levels, Pastor, it's essentially the exact same thing. And, you know, I created this chart and because I wanted the audience to have a visual, a side-by-side, so they would be able to see. And of course, there are some stark differences between the two bills, but yet there are some similarities that we cannot just gloss over. Both proposals came from New Hampshire. Both sought to unite church and state. Both would enshrine religious worship into law. Both would establish religious schools. Both would elevate Christians as a protected class. With those similarities, I truly believe with all of my heart, Pastor, that God is desperately trying to awaken his people.
2 points.
And I'm hoping we're able to see it.
And what was significant about the Jews when A.T. Jones wrote that the Jews would be excluded? In matters of religion, what day do they worship on? The seventh-day Sabbath. That means Seventh-day Adventist would also be excluded, not protected. That's exactly what another gentleman said when he was asked, what about the Jews? What about Seventh-day Adventists? And he said, we can't give accommodations to everybody. We can't tolerate SDAs. And Senator Blair, lastly, Marie, hailed from New Hampshire. That's the state it began. We have come to 2026, and this new bill to amend the state's constitution to promote the public worship of God only on Sunday begins not in Georgia, not in New York City, not in Florida, you get the point, but in New Hampshire. This should awaken every SDA on the planet, Marie.
Yes, that's it, Pastor. That's all I have to say. I think we've made it clear, what's happening.
Notice what Sister White says. You will know a Sunday law is near. She says, when there is a movement to amend the U.S. Constitution. The blue word says, this is Sister White with A.T. Jones. As he was preaching, he was sharing that there are movements of those who are acting their part in the fulfilling prophecy in bringing about the religious amendment. That's it right there. In the next quote, she says, watch carefully here, my friends. Red words, she says, as a matter of fact, if the people can be led to favor a Sunday law, then the clergy intend to exert their united influence to obtain a religious amendment to the Constitution and compel the nation to keep Sunday. That is on the federal level. But we're now seeing it on the state level. Just as with which other movement, Marie, which other pagan movement, heathen movement began on the state level before it became federal? Marie.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Which other movement began on the state level and then it became federal?
The same-sex union law.
And what are the twin institutions God gave to man from the Garden of Eden?
Marriage and the Sabbath.
So since marriage went that way, the counterfeit marriage, state level first, then federal, what about the counterfeit day of worship? The counterfeit Sabbath? It must begin on the state level. Why New Hampshire? Now, do you know what would be a nail in a sure place, Marie? A finishing nail also is that all this began not with New Hampshire. It began with Heritage Foundation. That is who Kevin Roberts behind the scenes, and behind him, the Pope of Rome. Does Kevin Roberts promotes the Convention of States?
Yes.
In rewriting the U.S. Constitution and also state constitutions? Yes, he does. Here is the fact. It's on the screen, headline right there. Kevin Roberts. All right? And this would rewrite the Constitution, federal level and state level. Here he is now. Listen.
There's a whole bucket of longer term objectives we need to be thinking about. And we just need to keep as a tool in our toolbox some equally radical ideas that are very sound and legitimate, like the Convention of States. Just because Trump and Vance won doesn't mean that we should give up on that project. In fact, I am told by some Convention of State friends they're tuning in to the live stream, so thank you. But the points in Heritage maybe having something to do with my being there the last few years, has become a sponsor of the Convention of States, because we realize the objective isn't just short term, it's long term. And I know that President Trump and Vice President Vance are thinking about that.
Mercy. And that is to rewrite the Constitution, not only on the federal level, but also on the state level. And which institution despises the U.S. Constitution from the very founding of America? Marie, what is that so-called church called?
The papacy, the Roman Catholic Church.
And it's on the screen right there. And they believe the U.S. Constitution is a pestilential error. The most, they said, it should be repudiated. The church should be able to force people to go along with Roman Catholicism. These are the last days. And the same Kevin Roberts, who wants to rewrite the Constitution, is the same one just promoted in January of 2026, a unified day of what, Marie?
Rest.
A uniform day of rest on Sunday, and to force people to go to church. Marie, any closing words?
You know, Pastor, I was thinking to myself, you know, we're living in the anti-typical Day of Atonement. And when you look back at the earthly sanctuary, on the Day of Atonement, as the people were afflicting their souls, right? The priest put on his robe, and on the bottom of his robe was a pomegranate and a bell, all along, right? And the purpose of this, I believe you can read this in Exodus, the purpose of it was so that those who were outside of the sanctuary could hear the high priest movement in the sanctuary, in the holy place, the most holy place, right? And I believe that we are hearing the bells ringing as Christ is preparing to come, not from the holy place into the most holy place, but to come out of the most holy place. And I'm praying and I'm hoping that we can hear that sound. We can hear the bells ringing through these current events, and we can make ourselves ready, because he's coming, and he's not coming as a priest. He's coming, you know, to execute judgment, and may we be ready.
Well said. My closing words are both prophetic and also about our conversion. This article was printed by the Washington Post, Marie. It states, between 1830 and 1890, which also includes 1888, a series of states, Marie, passed laws known as Sunday laws. All right? Notice, it goes on to state that for Seventh-day Adventists, they didn't go along with those Sunday laws. And the Washington Post, a secular media press in America, wrote these words. In 1888, New Hampshire Congressman Henry Blair even attempted to pass a national Sunday law. But the measure failed due in large part to the organized objection of Seventh-day Adventists. That is startling. And then they said, because we won't go along with the Sunday movement, that we are a cult and that we want to see America destroyed. We don't want to keep the Sunday Sabbath. Everybody, the Washington Post just succinctly state what we have been saying. First of all, a series of states, of what? States were pushing Sunday laws. But Senator Henry Blair from New Hampshire was pushing for a national Sunday law. You see that now? So from states to the federal level. That's it. So as we see a repetition now, beginning in New Hampshire, state after state after state, the next step is national. And God is allowing us to see the movements. Cestius is here already. The bells and pomegranates. The alarm is being sounded by the high priest. Not by literal bells and pomegranates now. Signs of the last days. Are we focused on these events? It's time to implement those 5 keys of survival. Do not take this for granted. We may never hear another wake-up call. Marie, are you through?
I am.